What's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Simple Question. It's your boy, Scott Proctor, joined as always by my guy, Matt Morris. We'll have more than one simple question today because we got a special guest joining us today for the second time, Broncos insider at KOA Colorado, Benjamin Allbright. Benjamin, how are we doing, my man? Thanks for joining us.
Oh, no problem, guys. I appreciate you guys having me.
Absolutely. So the vibes around the Denver Broncos couldn't be more different than the last time we talked. Around the springtime, the Broncos had just traded for Russell Wilson. And while you told us that you liked Hackett, the question would be, whether he could coach, And we've since learned that he can't. He simply can't. Obviously, he's been fired by the Denver Broncos here recently. Was it the right decision, Benjamin, to fire Hackett when they did? I know you kind of have a personal belief that, head coaches should get at least 3 years, but what'd you make of the timing of Hackett's fire here by the Broncos?
Well, let me start off by saying they were going to wait till the end of the year. There was an altercation on the sideline that kind of necessitated the firing, and that was with the starting offensive guard shoving the backup quarterback after he told the offensive line to pick Russell Wilson up after he was getting sacked because they weren't doing it. So they got to get to the point where they kind of had to do that, had to make that move. They were going to at the end of this season, and it was kind of a perfect storm situation because, you had an ownership group that wasn't even in place when he was hired, and just everything that had gone wrong along the way. I like Nathaniel Hackett as a person. I hope he gets another chance to be a head coach, and I don't doubt that he'll be successful and learn from the mistakes that he made here. But there were just too many mistakes made. It was on-field issue, game management issues, on-field issues, off-field issues. It was a mistake not to have even hired anybody with any core competency to be able to learn from, people with experience. The person with the second most experience on that staff on the offensive side was Clint Kubiak, who had 1 year of play calling. It really just was a perfect storm situation. Yes, I agree with the firing. They had to do it at that point, even though I am of the belief you should always give a head coach 3 years to see the vision through.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it was a tough situation. And, I mean, that altercation says it all, kind of encompasses what's happened with Hackett. But we had Mark Schlereth on the show recently, and he had his own kind of take on what was going on. He had some things to say about Russell Wilson and the Broncos. And I think we got the clip for it. We'll play that real quick.
When the organization acquiesces to a guy who has done nothing for the organization to this point, he's done it for another organization, but you acquiesce all those things. If you also acquiesce the coach's authority, if you appoint a coach but you don't empower a coach, well, that's on you as an organization. And my feeling, or my gut feeling, says that if I just follow the tea leaves, like what's happened? They went from, we talked about the offense they ran week one compared to what they're running now. So that to me is an offensive staff that has acquiesced to somebody. And the only one I can imagine that has been given that power is the quarterback. So you have acquiesced from this 2 tight end, 2 back, run the wide zone, set up your play action, be under center 60% of the time, to a 3 wide spread, be in shotgun 70% of the time. So you've acquiesced that. Your head coach, who's been a play caller in the past, has acquiesced his play calling duties and given it to somebody else. Like every part of this organization feels like it's acquiesced to number 3.
So obviously Mark Schlereth, played for the Broncos. Benjamin, is there any validity to that in your sense of with being around the team and seeing how the Russell Wilson era has begun? Is there any validity to what Mark was saying as far as the team sort of acquiescing to their star quarterback?
I think there are people that read into that. I don't believe that what he said as stated is true. Yes, they did switch some things around the offense, but part of that was personnel. I mean, they had injuries, and they had players that were ineffective. And so the idea that they totally just changed everything to something that Russell Wilson wanted, which isn't what Russell Wilson wanted, kind of seems odd to me. As far as acquiescing to Russ, I mean, I think what most people do is they start to point out the office that Russ had up on the coach's floor. Peyton Manning had the same thing. Tom Brady has the same thing down in Tampa. Nobody mentions those because they're winning. I think that those are a large part of the reason that people say this stuff. I don't think they're acquiescing to Russell Wilson at all. I think they're finding a coach that knows how to coach Russell Wilson. That's part of the reason they fired the very player-friendly Nathaniel Hackett and are looking at guys that are not necessarily known as players, coaches in that regard. Guys like Jim Harbaugh. Or, I know Sean Payton's name's been floated around. I don't think that's going to happen. Dan Quinn is a player's coach, but bringing in Brian Schottenheimer, who maximized Russell Wilson. So I don't agree with what he said as stated. I think there is truth to what he's saying, but I don't agree with it specifically as stated.
Gotcha.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, this is just a full, complete failure on every level of the Broncos organization. To pit it on one or two guys even doesn't really make sense. I want to go here, Benjamin, because I know you've seen the outpouring of support recently from Broncos teammates of Russell Wilson, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, Garrett Bowles, to name a few. Took to Twitter to support, in the face of a lot of criticism for Russ, support their quarterback. What did you make of their outpouring of support publicly? Do you think it was sincere, and do you think it's kind of proof that this thing in Denver is solvable here moving forward?
Well, I know the support was sincere. It came out of a players-only meeting and a decision to go ahead and do that because they got tired of everybody blasting Russ, and they're trying to figure out where it's coming from. There are guys in that locker room that don't like Russell Wilson, just like any workplace environment. Not everybody likes everybody. So that's a part of it. But as far as the outpouring of support and pretending that was staged or pretending that was some kind of anything like that, that's just ludicrous. I don't know where people come up with this stuff. No evidence to support it. They just make this stuff up out of thin air, and it, for some reason it travels. I guess what is the saying? A lie will travel the world before the truth has time to get its shoes tied or whatever. There are people that love Russ, and there are people that don't necessarily like Russ. That doesn't mean that they can't come together and try to play football, win football games. I mean, it's at the end of the day, there are people that think he's cringe and people that actually like what he's doing. And so, I mean, I don't really know how to answer that other than to say, like, look, these guys are doing the best they can. The things that people stated were definitely from the heart. Garrett Bowles didn't have to say anything. I mean, he's on IR. He's not even around the team right now. So, it's all genuine. It's a genuine outpouring of support, and it's kind of like, that's our brother. That's our teammate. How dare you come in and say people don't like him when you, media member, don't know?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that you see players do that all the time, and it is nice to see them come up and speak about Russ that way, and to kind of look towards the future. Even though Denver did give up some picks to get Russ, they actually still have a first-round pick because of the trade with the Dolphins. And there's obviously some positives on both the offense and defensive side of the ball. What do you think that they need to do in the draft to kind of start building towards this future and take a team that everybody thought might be a playoff contender and actually make that, a truth?
Well, offensive line, first of all, if you're going to scrap and gut that entire offensive line, Quinn Miners will be back at the right guard position, but everybody else is potentially on the chopping block, including Garrett Bowles. They'll see. Like I said, Quinn's the only guaranteed a spot back. I don't think that Lloyd Cushenberry will be back. I don't think Dalton Reisner will be back. Reisner might be back on a very cheap deal, but he won't be back in a highly paid deal. And they still have to solve the right tackle position, something they haven't done in a decade and a half. So, there's plenty to go on there. The other thing they need, speed, wide receiver. You've got guys that can make catches. Cortland Sutton, Tim Patrick when he's healthy, two of the best ball catchers, in the league, but they don't have the top off speed. Jerry Jeudy, great route runner, but doesn't quite have that fourth gear. KJ Hamler does, but he's been unavailable because he's been hurt. So they need reliable speed that can take the top off. Somebody that threatens defensive coordinators enough that they've got to change the way they game plan for the Broncos. If you can find those two things, an offensive line and one guy that can just take the top off, then I think you'll be fine. Defensively, I mean, this team's pretty stacked, Despite the fact that the offense has been all-time bad, they were still almost, nearly all-time good, despite being out on the field for 60, 70 plays a game. So, I really do think that defensively they're pretty set. They just need to solidify the edge rush a little bit. Offensively, you got to fix the offensive line and get some speed at receiver.
Yeah. Shout out Quinn Myers, too, a D3 Whitewater alum. Shout out to WIAC for sure. Quinn Myers been balling for sure. Benjamin, you mentioned Harbaugh earlier. You mentioned Sean Payton as well. I'm curious at this point who your gut feeling is in terms of who will be the Broncos head coach in 2023. Obviously, those two names are going to be probably the two biggest names that we hear. But where's your gut feeling? What are you thinking right now in terms of the Broncos head coach?
Yeah, I don't believe it'll be Sean Payton. I don't believe that's going to happen. I think that Jim Harbaugh or Dan Quinn is where this search is going to go, and ultimately circle. There'll be some other guys that'll get interviews. Certainly Leslie Frazier will probably get an interview. Jiro Evero will definitely get an interview. Jim Caldwell might get an interview. Shane Steichen, they'll probably try to interview him. He's the hottest name this coaching cycle. It's weird to me because Sean Payton keeps getting trotted out as the hottest name this coaching cycle, and he's really not. Like the teams I've talked to, there's like 2 landing spots for him, and everybody else is like, yeah, I don't want to pay $25 million a year to a guy that quit on his team when they got in a cap crunch. So, I think the legend of Sean Payton outpaces the actual record of Sean Payton. He got 1 Super Bowl with a top 10 all-time quarterback in Drew Brees.
And a lot of sub 500 records during that span too.
He had 5 seasons where he was 500 or worse with a top 10 all-time quarterback. How does that even happen? So I don't think Sean Payton's a real thing here. I think that name's been floated around, but I don't think that's a real thing. I think he winds up in Arizona or LA. I do believe that it'll probably be Harbaugh or Quinn. If Harbaugh wants to come here, it'll be Harbaugh. If it's not him, then I think they'll circle the drain on Dan Quinn while trying out some other interviews.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Absolutely does. And, we talked about what they might do in free agency. Obviously, you mentioned that the defense is great. And basically, my question for you is, Benjamin, how do they not waste this defense and they take advantage of what is, not only a playoff contending defense, but probably one that could, lead you deep and maybe even get you to a Super Bowl?
Well, I think the key here is going to be continuity. Whatever the new head coach is, the idea would be, I think, to keep a Jiro Evero. Obviously Evero was on Harbaugh's staff all 4 years in San Francisco, so that I don't think would be an issue. I think the other side of that with Dan Quinn, you bring in Brian Schottenheimer as the OC, somebody who's worked together and got the best out of Russ, and Evero was Raheem Morris's right-hand man. Raheem Morris, of course, was Dan Quinn's right-hand man, so there's a tangential connection there. Dan Quinn's been running a lot of too high this year. In fact, 55% of the time he's running too high. He's not running cover 1, cover 3 all the time anymore. I think he's evolved. I think their defenses are compatible. I think that's how you do it. You just got to find a way to get points out of this offense. If they are even middle of the road, this is a dangerous football team. And instead, they're all-time bad and still losing 1-score games.
Yeah, I think it was like if Denver scored 20 points in most of their games, they'd almost have like a 13-3 record or something. It's very rare that anybody scores more than 20 against this Denver defense.
Well, if they'd scored 18 points in all their games in regulations, they'd have 2 losses on the season. 18 points.
It's a damn shame.
Wow.
It's an all-time offensive gaffe from a franchise, a team that had a lot of expectations going into it. I want to move from one AFC West team to another that has a lot of buzz surrounding it right now. That's obviously the Las Vegas Raiders making the decision to bench Derek Carr for the rest of the season. Obviously, it looks like their quarterback situation moving forward has a lot of question marks. What do you make of that, and what do you think is next, firstly, for the Raiders and then for Carr in terms of 2023?
Well, Carr will be somewhere else. I'll tell you that. They're not benching him to bring him back. They are trying to trade him. The reason that they benched him is because he's got guaranteed money due to injury at the 5th day of the league year. So they didn't want to get him injured in the final 2 games, or him to get injured in the last, I'm doing the air quotes here, in the last 2 games. That's part of the reason. They're moving on from him. I don't know where he's going to go. I've talked to the Carr family a little bit, and they're pretty upset with the way he's been treated. He's done nothing but give it all to the Raiders, and I'm gonna be honest with you, there's a lot of respect here in Denver for Carr for what he's done, having to go through different coordinators in difficult situations and still being a trooper and all that. Yeah. It's not his fault the Raiders haven't fielded they're kind of the anti-Broncos. They haven't fielded a defense since the 90s, I think. So, yeah. It's not Derek Carr's fault that that's happening. That said, Carr did not really glom onto the McDaniel system this year the way that he needed to. I don't think that that's necessarily all on him, but it's just one of those sad situations. As far as where he could go, I mean, the Jets, the Dolphins, if Tua retires, and that is a very real possibility. There's a few other teams out there. Indy, I think, is one that would take a look. Potentially Carolina, although I think that's a long shot, and possibly Washington. So there's some teams out there that could take a look at Derek Carr and kind of figure that out. Don't sleep on Seattle either. If they let go of Pete Carroll and he retires or gets voluntold to retire this offseason, John Gannon could take over as the head coach there. They might bring Derek Carr in.
Interesting. Where do you think that leaves the Raiders, though, in terms of their quarterback next season? Do you think they try to supplement that in the draft or in free agency, which should have a handful of quarterbacks ready in it?
Josh McDaniels always looks for his dudes. So look, you got to look for his guy. I thought Stidham did all right in that last game. I didn't think he looked terrible. That might be his thing. Josh McDaniels might be trying to show everybody what a genius he is by rolling Jarrett Stidham out there. So, that he might live or die by that. McDaniels famously lived or died by trading away Jay Cutler the last time. So,
yeah,
I think that it'll probably be Stidham and some draft pick to buy himself time. That would be my guess.
Interesting. That would be very on brand for Josh McDaniels there. And you mentioned it too. He's done this before. Similarly in Denver, obviously, shipping off Jay Cutler, and because he simply wasn't his guy, and going on to Kyle Orton and whoever else that obviously didn't last long at Denver. But that's awesome stuff, Benjamin. Thanks so much for joining us again, my man. For Scott Proctor, Matt Morris, our guy Benjamin Allbright. Catch you next time on Simple Question.
Thanks for watching. Feel free to check out our other videos and don't forget to smack that subscribe button down below while you're at it. Also, for more great and original content, head right over to bvmsports.com.